refer to the European Union as a peace project. I can no longer refer to it in such terms. I think the degree of apathy, and I do agree on some nations there has been apathy, I don't hold ourselves accountable for that. I think we've stood out because the bar was so low, but how when we're approaching what's already been met the standard of a genocide, when we have an approaching famine, can the European Council meeting that's meeting this week still have precisely almost the same agenda as they had in January? At the end of January, reflecting on the last EU Council meeting with the post-Council statements, we were lamenting the conclusions that were utterly divorced from the reality on the ground in Gaza. Those conclusions condemned Hamas in the strongest terms. They recognised Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law, and only thirdly did they state that they expressed their grave concern over the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza, as if it was happened by some freak of nature. Grave concern. It's March 20 today, and here are the priorities listed on this month's Council meeting. Once again, condemned Hamas force. Secondly, and they're going to recognise Israel's right to defend itself in accordance with international law. And then thirdly, they once again acknowledged the grave concern for the situation in Gaza. It's an deplorable abdication of responsibility when you consider the horror being inflicted, and it is being inflicted by the State of Israel on the people in Gaza. Those exact same conclusions from December's meeting being at the start of the 4 of March's. The EU and its leaders, they're simply choosing to turn their backs on one of the most horrific events in recent memory. I know that language is hard to say, that somebody's chosen to turn their backs, but I use it purposely, because what else can we take from the fact that we still have almost a refusal to find consensus on calling for a ceasefire, a consensus on actually imposing sanctions? I mean, I know the Taoiseach, after many months of lobbying from ourselves and others, wrote to Ursula von der Leyen and asked, was Israel in breach of the humanitarian clauses of the EU-Israel trade agreement? I think the Taoiseach referenced that there hasn't actually even been an official response from Ursula von der Leyen's office. He mentioned that it was discussed at the last Council meeting. Discussed. What more? What are documented minutes of that discussion? I want to know who was in favour, who was against, what could possibly be the justification for enacting the humanitarian clauses within those agreements, because otherwise we might as well just rip them up. We are literally watching not just a genocide of 2,000-pound bombs being dropped on a tiny area with a civilian population. We're also now watching the forced famine. Famine literally being used as a weapon of war. And I genuinely do the efforts across the chamber of our own ministers, people across the chamber, but there doesn't seem to be the same degree of urgency. And so we say we'll raise it, we'll talk with our partners. I actually need more than that. I actually think we need to be screaming it from the top of our lungs. No more is the time for polite letters and a kind of waiting for responses that never come, or say that we had a side meeting with somebody at the EU Council. We actually need to be demanding it. And when we sign up to these agreements, we do so with all of our constituencies. When Ireland's a part of these, we represent the Irish people. If these agreements exist, we have to be enforced. Otherwise, what's the purpose of them? When I'm knocking at doors and going and canvassing at the moment, I mean, it's the number one issue that's coming up for people. There's a huge sense of how are we enabling this to happen? And we are. It just genuinely feels like we're enabling this to happen. And when I say we, I don't just mean this. I just mean as a collective EU, and it is undermining it. I am a strong, proud member of the European Union, always have been, but this is obliterating that. And I think now is the time for strong leadership to emerge. I mean, we can't just keep operating on the same belief system we had a month ago and a month before that we can't act unilaterally. We absolutely have to be. We have to be. That would be the urge that I would give to Taoiseach as he goes on to this last EU Council meeting. There are other issues as well. The EU is taking a very dark turn. Parties of the European Union, in particular the European People's Party, they're taking a shift to the right that's unbecoming of the founding principles of the European Union. As we stand on a critical juncture, the EPP of Ursula von der Leyen and Fine Gael, I mean, they found themselves wanting when it comes to the issue of migration, when it comes to the issue of the nature restoration law, for example. These are complex but absolutely vitally important issues to all of our future, and we're seeing people mimic the far right as a way of not letting them overtake us. There's a number of ways that I could highlight those, but I actually think the fact that the EU is now proposing something similar to the horrific Tory Rwanda deal, and the fact that actually our own Taoiseach, still our Taoiseach, was given the impression that we've been somehow supporting that, we absolutely can't be. if that's what the EU is becoming, like, I mean, it's in absolute opposition to the fundamental principles. If people that want to come here precisely because it was built on a foundation of peace, if drums are being dropped on them, why wouldn't you want to seek that? And yet we want to, like, export people to other countries that are less safe. That wouldn't be done in my name. Certainly wouldn't be done in the name of the people of Dublin. I think we're better than that. Good morning.
Deputy.